We've all heard the Taliban's promises about protecting women's rights on the streets of Kabul, but it's a very different story. Tonight you'll hear the disturbing insight from a commander on the ground and the Australian doctor who says their new spin's all smoke and mirrors.
Protests on the streets of Afghanistan met with increasing force by the Taliban. Women are being whipped, journalists bashed. But the Taliban insist they are different this time.
We are forgiving people now. We are hugging people.
Tonight we hear from an English-speaking Taliban commander inside Kabul and a former refugee who's not buying their new spin.
They have Twitter accounts, they speak better English, they can fool people easy.
His name is Wahidullah Hashimi. He was born into the Taliban and started fighting international troops as a schoolboy.
Sometimes going to school and sometimes going to fighting, sometimes university, sometimes fighting.
In recent weeks, he and his men have been celebrating victory over the US and its allies. He says he hopes for friendly relations now with Australia.
And we do invite them to Afghanistan to come and help us build Afghanistan again.
The world is now watching whether the Taliban offers those friendly relations to its own citizens, in particular women. Female students have been allowed to return to university, but now with petitions separating them from men. But female secondary school students have been banned from attending classes entirely. What role do you believe women should have in Afghanistan?
According to me, the best place for women is home, according to me. They have to remain in home. We have different jobs, outside jobs and inside jobs.
Mr. Hashimi says it won't be him but religious scholars who will ultimately decide, but he does not believe a woman should be allowed to be a politician. Afghanistan has had many female politicians before. Why do you say a woman can't be a politician anymore?
Because our Sharia law does not allow to have women in politics. If we go back to the 1400 years, the time of the Prophet, at that time we had no women in politics.
That was 1400 years ago though. So much has changed since then. Isn't it time the Taliban changed its views?
No, Islam, the religion of Islam will never get changed. What was 1400 years ago would be the same this time too.
I think this perfectly exemplifies each and every Talib's way of thinking.
Dr. Homa Furutan is a perfect example of what women can achieve once freed from oppression. She fled the previous Taliban regime aged 13, arriving in Australia on a humanitarian visa where she studied medicine, becoming a doctor. She says Islam can change, but the Taliban's fanatical interpretation of it is warped to suit their needs.
I think if someone comes in and imposes themselves and say, look, we are doing this for God, and it's a very powerful tool to use a religion in that way that suits your narrative. So I think it's the biggest weapon they have.
The signs emerging so far are not good for Afghan women. No females were included in an interim government, and the Ministry of Women's Affairs no longer exists.
They're sending out a message that they do not really need anyone else, they do not really care about anyone else, and they're going to run the country on their own rules and not listen to anyone else.
Spokespeople for the Taliban had claimed women's rights would be protected, but some protests are now being shut down with increasing violence.
My concern is that with less and less cameras being available on the ground, with more and more people withdrawing, these crimes will go unnoticed and Taliban will be on a free killing spree.
A pro-Taliban rally of women covered head to toe also hit the streets, claiming they are happy with the new regime and providing an indication of what the future looks like for females.
If you can come and suppress a large group of half of the society who are women and just declare yourself the ultimate moral authority, why not? It gives you a lot of power.
Its military power was also on display at a recent victory parade in Kandahar. Along with orthodox military hardware, it also included suicide explosive vests and car bombs that were a hallmark of its fight against Australia and its allies. Dozens of Australian soldiers were killed or injured in suicide attacks, along with many thousands of Afghan civilians.
Can I ask, what is the Taliban's position on the use of suicide bombings now?
We will not carry out martyrdom-seeking attacks anymore because our country is free now, we have independence, and that is it. No more these attacks.
Afghanistan had no history of suicide bombings until the Taliban introduced them around 2005. Now, another terrorist group, ISIS-K, is using the same sickening tactic, detonating this bomb at Kabul airport after the Taliban seized power.
Suicide attacks often kill a lot of innocent people, civilians, women, children. Why were they ever justified by the Taliban?
Because our country was invaded and we had no weapons. We had one gun for 10 persons. One gun. That is why this was the only option for us.
I think that's a very shameful statement. If they really believed a word from the book they're supposed to practice, the book says if you kill one innocent person, it's equivalent to killing the entire humanity, and it's completely forbidden.
This Taliban commander says Afghanistan will not be used to stage attacks on Western countries again, but with one condition: that support is provided to rebuild the war-torn country and help extract its minerals.
If they do not help us in this regard, then any problem happens in Afghanistan will be a problem and a threat to the international security and world security.
And there's a lot of proof on the ground that nothing that they've portrayed themselves to be has actually materialized. They are the same Taliban that they've been.